Welcome to episode 5 of the Drift Rd.3 series. I was going to do a special on Formula Drift Round 3, which was this weekend in Orlando. But there's a lot of videos that are going to be out and probably already are out for that, and I kind of thought that you could get that kind of content from a number of other channels, so it wouldn't really be special on mine. So I decided instead to do something more like in the vein of Wrecked Magazine's 10 Things I Learned About, and do a sort of, similar, things I learned about, or things I learned at FDOrlando Round 3. So now on to the things I learned about this round. First of all, this isn't my first time at this track. It's not even my first FD event at this track. I've been to this track multiple times, and I think that as an amateur or just a hobbyist drifter, the track is completely fine. It definitely offers you enough challenges for you to learn and become a better driver without being so challenging that you're, intimidated by the track. However, that said, it's not quite to the standard it should be at for, in my opinion, for a professional drifting event. The level of competition and the level of commitment in driving that these drivers have, combined with the amount of power that the cars make and the amount of speed they're able to develop, really illustrated some of this track's flaws. And not just the track itself, but really the whole venue. Firstly, the track surface is way too porous. And what I mean by that is it absolutely destroys tires. I mean, there's no reason a track that short should shoot through tires that quickly. And almost all the drivers at any level of the pro drivers could only get 2 laps out of a set of tires before they were down past the wear bars, and in some cases down to the threads. Secondly, the management or owners at OSW, they employ a really good staff. The staff was much better this year than last year's event. Last year's event, there were actual children working, and it was a bit of a shit show. There was children trying to direct traffic, children trying to park people, and it went about how you could probably imagine it would go with children running parts of a professional event. Not well. But that aside, the track, not the actual surface of the track that you drive on, but the track itself it needs some work. It's not the friendliest for the spectators. And I was fortunate enough to watch the event from inside the Achilles tent, which I'll get into later. But as far as spectators go, because I was in the stands for some amount of the weekend, it is not well set up. Firstly, the stands themselves are wood planks, which aren't known for being terribly comfortable to begin with, but a lot of the planks were in a state of disrepair, and you could see that they had replaced some of the planks because the majority of the planks were black, and there was a few natural, obviously recently replaced natural finished planks, but the stands themselves were terribly uncomfortable. So that's problem number 1. And then also, you know, the ones that weren't just freshly replaced, some of them were literally breaking apart as people stepped on them. Which, of course, is going to happen with wood, but it was like a lot of them breaking apart. Second point on that topic, there's really nowhere to go as a spectator to escape the heat. And not so much the heat because, you know, you're in South Florida, it's going to be there, but like this direct sunlight. The way the track is positioned in the beginning of the day, if you're in the stands, the sun is in your face, depending on what stands you're in, but like the main stands. And at the end of the day, it's behind you, so it's bearable, but usually the event's nearly over by then. Or you've already been baking for hours, and so you don't even care anymore. So I would think, and of course I realize this all comes at an additional expense, but I would think as the owner of a track, especially one that has signed a contract for 3 years with Formula Drift, which, you know, for better or for worse, is the largest drifting body in the world, you would think that a venue like Orlando Speed World would spend money where they knew they needed to spend money in order to earn the revenue that the event will draw. The next topic about the track that I want to touch on is, or the next point about the track topic that I want to touch on is, the center of the track. So it's kind of like a big figure eight. It's a figure eight that starts on a bank and then wraps around and transitions to the apron on the opposite side of the oval and runs around the apron and then finishes in the center, or near the center. And the track was designed to have, purposely I'm sure, to have a high spot in the center of what would be the crossover to assisted drainage. There's a hump in the middle of the track, and they have at least one drainage gate on the other side of the hump, possibly two. And clearly that was designed to aid rainwater runoff when rain falls, like it did last year. There was talk last year, and there was even more talk this year amongst kind of people who are somewhat local to the track. I live about an hour away myself. That some people weren't going to come back to see Formula Drift, or really anything, if the track didn't make itself a little bit more hospitable for the fans. Which, I mean, if you think about it, the fans are paying all the bills for the entire show anyway, so they should be as comfortable as you can make them, you would think, I would think. The problem with that setup, which isn't inherent to that setup at all tracks, but is in this one, is that the slope to feed the drains that's paved into the center section is way too high and way too drastic. So what you end up with is basically a jump. You end up with a jump. What I mean is you come off the bank, so your suspension's already doing silly shit from that. Then you run into a ramp, like a concrete or asphalt ramp that shoots you up in the air, and then your suspension does silly shit then, and then you come down, and then there's another sort of little ridge. So there's basically a whoop section, a paved whoop section, and that doesn't lend itself to clean drifting, although it does lend itself to a lot of fucking disappointment because, you know, you have cars doing things they were never designed to do in drifting on the track, and it I'm sure upset basically the whole field, and it quite literally cost some highly competitive drivers their run. So you can bet that they're not thrilled about that aspect of the track either. Now, I don't want to beat up on OSW too much because it really is a good venue. It just has a couple of oversights that need addressing, and then it'll be a really good venue to go to. Another thing which would be nice but would be really expensive because it would require building an entirely new structure. But another thing that would be nice that I only know about, having crewed before, is if there was some sort of covered space for the teams as well, aside from what they bring on their own, because it can be very difficult to deal with Florida sunshine and the heat, because that makes everything worse. And because there was nowhere like a tunnel or even sort of a temporary carport at the staging lanes or something like that, because that doesn't exist at this track, one of the drivers who is not accustomed to the humidity and the heat that you can have in Florida literally threw up, I think, on the grid in his vehicle. Like, he didn't throw up in his vehicle, but he threw up outside of his vehicle while he was in it. And if there was just some carports set up, or some sort of a temporary collapsible tunnel set up for the grid, those drivers would have been in much better shape. So these are the sort of things you need to consider when you're going to host a professional motorsports event. How accommodating is the facility for the spectators and the competitors, because they're the only reason your venue's being used that weekend. So just keep that in mind. The next thing I want to discuss is the Achilles team. And I don't just mean their roster of drivers, but I mean the entire Achilles staff and support team at the Formula Drift events. I don't want to name names because I don't want to put anybody in a weird position or say anything that I shouldn't, but they are by far the best group of people running a program in FD that I have ever had the fortune of meeting. And I ran crew for a professional driver for 2 years or so, and I met basically everyone. And the staff running the Achilles program at the events is second to none. They're just an excellent group of people. And if you are at an FD event, I absolutely recommend you go talk to the drivers, talk to the staff, introduce yourself. They're awesome people. Something else I kind of want to get into that, as a fan, you wouldn't really know. You might suspect, but you wouldn't really know. But being on the inside, things that you see or notice or discover, you get some perspective that you wouldn't get if you weren't on the inside. And specifically what I'm talking about is whiny bitch drivers. I'm obviously, out of professional courtesy, I'm not going to name names, but there's a group of drivers. They are not new drivers. They've been around for a while. Their names basically everybody knows, who are really just a whiny bunch of pussies who will contest anything, who will call attention to anything, who will basically do or say whatever they think they have to do or say to gain some kind of a competitive advantage. And I don't mean that in the way that, they'll look at the rule book and go, okay, we can definitely do this, we definitely can't do that, so let's do this as far as we can do it, and let's don't worry about that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, there's a group of drivers who will basically try and sell out other drivers if they feel like they're remotely a threat to them succeeding either in the championship or at a round. And as I said, I'm not going to name names. I'm sure a lot of you who follow drifting on your own probably know who they are or have a strong suspicion. But yeah, there's some real bitch moves going on, with some veteran pros, and they're acting like the whiniest bunch of pussies you ever saw in your life. It's got to stop. However, that said, I know why it's happening, and this kind of relates to something that I'm sure every avid drifter or avid drift fan has discussed at some point, but it's an issue that I think deserves some time in the light. If for no other reason than to just get your opinions on the subject as viewers. There needs to be a horsepower cap in drifting. And I know as soon as I say that, a lot of you guys are going to go, oh, you're just saying that because you can't afford to make more power, or you're just saying that because, you know, you're a fucking fanboy. It has nothing to do with that at all. It has nothing to do with how it's supposed to be. It has nothing to do with its origins in Japan. It has nothing to do with any of that, in my opinion. The reason I'm saying that there needs to be a horsepower cap in drifting is because we have reached, as the drifting community has reached the point where we know we have found the maximum amount of power that tires, wheels, and studs will take. I mean, I've seen just this year, I've seen studs that were properly torqued, race spec studs, not going to name any brands because I don't want to get myself in trouble, but race spec studs that are more or less built to deal with the kind of power and the kind of forces that drifting and other forms of motorsport can put on a stud. I've seen them sheared off, snapped in half, not due to impact, just due to usage, and not because they were 2 seasons old. You know, one of the guys who did that, he didn't even run an event in that car yet. He built it and sheared them off in testing. So they are brand new race spec studs sheared off. So that's one example. Also, which was really apparent here with Jeff Jones, but really not just him, he just kind of was the most obvious example. But when you have a track surface like OSW that has that sort of crazy jump section in it, the tire shock, which is, you know, when the sidewalls deform due to impact, with the pressures that are being run, which are really low for grip, and the power that's being channeled through those tires, they are blowing off all the time. And that's an almost ridiculous thing to say, but literally the wheels are being spun inside the tires because the engines are making that much torque now in drifting. That's just, it's awesome, but it's also really shitty for the show. For the most part, most drivers' builds have gotten, you know, they've done enough R&D, or enough R&D has been done in the field that they can put together a car that won't break due to something that somebody overlooked or somebody hasn't, you know, found the practical limit of. You know, most of the vehicles now stay together. Even vehicles that were historically known to break down are staying together, and there's being, you know, the event's being stopped due to basically technical malfunctions relating to tires being blown off the beads, or wheels literally just breaking off, or studs, or, you know, axles being twisted in half, and it's just, you know, the car enthusiast part of me wants to say, well, then the industry just needs to make stronger shit, and I'll just pay for it. You know, I'll just pay for more stronger shit. But we're kind of reaching a point where, short of the use of exotic materials, which are exponentially more expensive, things are about as strong as they're going to get. And with that said, aside from the technical difficulties that the insane power levels, the, you know, quadruple digit power levels bring, it's promoting a culture where drivers do what I was talking about in my last point, where they bitch and complain to try and see if anyone's doing anything to gain a competitive advantage, because basically everyone's running 1,000 horsepower. Basically everyone's running the same sort of tires. You know what width tires somebody is running based on their weight class, because your tires determined by your weight as a professional driver. So, you know, for the most part, it's not like a spec series, But for the most part, everyone's kind of on a level playing field, and it really is only coming down to skill now, which is a good thing. But some drivers don't feel like, I guess, that they're competitive enough based solely on the merit of their own skill. It would appear that some of those drivers, which a lot of us thought were really, really skilled, really talented drivers, don't feel like their skill alone is enough to keep them at the top. And so they have to try and draw attention to other drivers who may or may not be doing something that may or may not be in the rule book or allowed by the rule book. Not because they got beaten. This isn't like something that they're doing after the fact where like somebody's, all of a sudden somebody's a whole lot faster than they were all weekend, or all of a sudden somebody's able to hold much more drastic of an angle than they were the entire, week. That's not what I'm talking about. That almost warrants you saying like, hey, something's up. But I mean, like, there are drivers who are calling foul before anything has even happened, before they've even battled the guy they're calling foul against. And they're doing this because the industry simply can't make things that stand up to 1,000 horsepower drifting. It's too much power, and the car is being used in a very rough manner, and it just parts can't, regular chromoly steel and hardened aluminum and semi-exotic aluminum alloys, they simply can't hold up to those kind of stresses. So I think that if you were to lower the horsepower to say something, not a whole lot lower, say like 800 wheel max, everybody would find a way to get there if they aren't there already. So a couple of cars aren't at 1,000, but really very few. Everybody would get there, and you would still have drivers that would want to complain. You would still have teams, because it's not just the drivers who try and raise the red flag and call foul. It's also their teams. Sometimes, a crew guy or a spotter or somebody will notice something and they'll challenge and call for a tech inspection. But if you cap the horsepower at, say, 800 as a number, that seems to be a number that most part manufacturers make a part to suit. There were, if you go back to say like 2011, maybe even as late as 2012, back when people were not running power levels as high as they are now, there was a lot less debeating. There was a lot less sheared studs. There were a lot fewer blown up wheels. So basically, it would make for a better show if cars were limited practically to 800 wheel horse or somewhere in that neighborhood, because more or less the parts that are on the cars seem to put up with power levels around that amount a whole lot easier than they do 1,000 horsepower. And as a spectator, if you're not in the show, if you're just there to watch the show, you want it to go over well. I mean, yeah, you want to see one more times if battles are close, and you couldn't yourself really pick a winner. Yeah, you want to see one more times. That doesn't delay the show. It makes it run longer, but you're still entertained. There's still things happening. When you have technical difficulties, breakages, things like that occurring because the horsepower is wild and unchecked and you can basically do whatever you want, and you have these breakages, it stops the action, and then the track crew has to come out, clean the car off, clean off any fluids it may have spilled, clean off any debris it might have created, and you're just sitting there in the stands not doing anything, checking your social media and shit, because there's nothing happening on the track in front of you. So this is something I think that really needs some consideration. And that kind of brings me to the next point that I was going to make, which is that this particular event was full of nothing. And I don't mean to say that nothing cool happened, because definitely there were some awesome battles that occurred, but due to things like breakages and kind of parts being pushed to their or past their upper limit of what they'll take, there was a fuck ton of wasted time at this event. There were parts of the top 32 and top 16 that went really quickly, but on the whole, it was stopped. The show was stopped numerous times because of shit like that. So it's just something I think that FD really needs to kind of sit down collectively and think about and talk about, and see if they can come up with some kind of solution to maintain the entertainment value that they worked so hard to create with drifting, or I should say bring focus to that drifting provides. But at the same time, you can't have an event be stopped numerous times because of things that you're just kind of overlooking, and have essentially the fan who is paying more or less all of the bills that weekend pay the price as well for your oversights in sitting around, not having fun, watching cleanup crews, basically not doing anything. It's not fun. The next thing I want to discuss, which I'm sure is something that you've probably already seen on the various drift-centric social media pages, is judging criteria. At this point, any fan who's been watching more than a year or two knows what the judges look for. We all know it's, line gets a certain amount of points, style gets a certain amount of points, angle gets a certain amount of points, and then there's this thing that they have called impact, which is essentially a judge's opinion of your run overall, all things considered. The problem for me, people who have been sort of, for lack of a better term, on both sides of the grid, I really think Formula Drift needs to take it a step further and explain what is worth what. Like, in other words, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, however you want to hash it out, how much each thing that they look at in a run is worth to the person that they're considering. What I mean by that is there's separate criteria for the lead driver and the follow driver, as well there should be, in the battles. And I think that Formula Drift needs to be a little bit more transparent about what those criteria are worth. They've kind of, they talk about what they look for in a chase driver on their chase and what they look for in a lead driver on their lead. But they haven't discussed, because really the majority of the pressure is on the chase driver when they're chasing. They haven't, as far as I know, and I've been to a few drivers' meetings, they haven't assigned like a weight or a value to each individual thing that they look for in a chase. For instance, when you chase, you're expected to be as close as you can to the lead driver. So that's one criteria. Another thing that they look for is how similar your angles are. They want you to mirror angle and transition at, essentially simultaneously. They want you to, come from one angle to another at the same time as the lead driver, and, give them enough room to transition and then get right back on their door and be as close as you can with the same angle all the time. So we have proximity as being one of the things that they look for in a chase, in a good chase, and the chase driver's ability to mimic the lead driver's angle. That's the second one. And this is not in any particular order. And then the third kind of thing that they look for is how many corrections the chase driver makes while chasing? You know, are they sawing at the wheel a lot? Are they surging back and forth a lot on the gas, off the gas? Does it look visibly difficult for them to be chasing? You know, the smoother you are out back, the better it looks. Or so we've been led to believe. There may be others, but the point that I'm making is that since they don't seem to really explain, or if they do, stick to the values of the separate little things they look for in a chase, it's led to a fuck ton of controversy this weekend about Frederick Osbo. And I used to be a fan of Frederick's back when he was the underdog, but recently, and really it was quite obvious at this event, regardless of what Formula Drift says, he is absolutely receiving a ton of favoritism on the surface. And what I mean by that is it looks like he's definitely receiving some favoritism. Now, I'm absolutely not saying that in any sort of official capacity. I'm just kind of saying what everyone's thinking. You know, the same dialogue that was going on in every tent, basically, which was just that, you know, he would, by the sort of public understanding of the rules for a chase, he lost, I want to say 3, possibly more battles due to either severely chopping angle to try and gain proximity, and then never gaining angle, never putting it back into his chase run, or by being 6, in some cases 8 car lengths back, which, you know, is basically, I mean, that's got to be damn close to an inactive chase. Out back, you know, kind of running the same angle and maybe the same line as the lead driver, but being, you know, so far back that in some videos he's literally not even in the frame from certain angles. And, you know, you can't say that about really any other driver who was competitive this whole weekend. Like, everybody else, you know, was within 4 lengths. A lot of guys were within a length. He was literally at some points in a certain run, and I don't want to get into which run because, well, frankly, I can't remember which run, but he was literally 8 cars back. That is not an active chase. I mean, he's not pressuring the lead driver in the slightest of ways. That lead driver didn't even know he was there anymore. And then also, and this is probably the one that angered people the most, there were certain chases that he just clearly had trouble with. He just was really ugly, very, you know, he had some very dirty runs, you know, a lot of changing of angles and a lot of sort of adjusting, even though he wasn't really that close to the driver he was chasing. And more or less the feeling on the weekend was just that for whatever reason, you know, you can call it corruption, you can call it luck, you can call it, you know, or blindness on the judge's behalf. You can call it whatever you want, but for whatever reason, Frederick kept getting one more times when he didn't deserve them, or outright getting the win when literally nobody could possibly explain why he might have gotten a win. And when I say nobody, I don't mean like nobody at FD. I mean no fan, no team member, nobody on either side of the grid could really explain why he won. Like, there were battles where, and as I said before, I was in the Achilles tent. He's not an Achilles driver, so but there were battles where he was driving against a driver that wasn't in the Achilles camp and won, and we were kind of all standing around like, what? So it wasn't even any sort of team bias. Like, nobody really knows why Frederick won some of the battles that he won, and I'm sure that Formula Drift at some point over the next week or two before the next event will address some of the concerns and do their best to try and explain what the judges were thinking when they scored those runs in Frederick's favor. But the problem is that Formula Drift as a company has a habit of running around putting out fires and trying to do damage control with these statements that they release shedding a little bit more light on the judges' criteria and the judges' point of view, and they could avoid all this bullshit and rumors and controversy and distrust from the fans and the teams by just coming out ahead of time and saying, these are the judges' criteria. Like, this is what they have to look for. This is how much it's worth. When you're in this situation, this is worth more, but when you're in that situation, that's worth more. If they went through and released a cohesive sheet that explained everything, not only would it cut down on the controversy, because people, then it would just be like somebody maybe misunderstanding the rules or whatever if they had a problem with the way a call went, but actually it would make the driving better, because all of the drivers would know exactly what was expected of them at any point in time during a run. So it really has no downside. It's better for the fans because they know what to look for, and it's better for the drivers because they know what to do. So, that's something that maybe Formula Drift should kind of make you think about. I mean, I would. Anyway, enough kicking the Formula Drift horse. The last topic I want to kind of close on is the Central Florida drift scene. Specifically, what I mean is sort of the Orlando drift scene. I've lived in a lot of different places since I started doing and paying attention to drifting, which is probably 10 years ago, or maybe a little more. And of all the places that I've lived, nowhere have the drivers been so cool and so helpful and had such a sense of community as they do in the Orlando area. Because not all the drivers in that scene literally live in Orlando, but I mean, that if you're a part of that scene, it really feels way more like sort of like a band of brothers or a family than it does in any other scene in any other city that has a decent drift scene. And I've lived in a lot of different places. I actually technically live in South Florida, although I live in the northernmost city in South Florida. But as a result, I go down to South Florida a lot, and there are a bunch of drifters in the Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Boca, Miami areas, Homestead areas. But those guys are not nearly as close to each other as the guys in the Orlando and the girls in the Orlando area are. I mean, it's just a completely different animal, and it is the coolest scene, drift scene that I've ever been a part of. It probably doesn't hurt that companies like BC Racing and Injuku, who have, and a few others as well, who have a huge presence in professional drifting and amateur drifting. It probably doesn't hurt that those companies are also based in Orlando or the Orlando area. Even I think even if those companies weren't in the Orlando area, the Orlando scene would still be the best one that I've ever been a part of. So, if you are thinking about moving to Florida and you're into drifting, I absolutely recommend you move to that area, because I mean, I'm considering moving there just because the sense of community is so good and so strong. And that pretty much covers the weekend. If there's anything that I left out that you think maybe deserves some time being discussed, or if you have a point of view that's completely different from mine, feel free to leave it in the comments and tell me what you think and why, and maybe we'll discuss it in a future video, because I don't just do these so I can hear myself talk or watch myself talk, but also to kind of reach out and talk to you guys and see what you think, and make the whole thing better for both of us. And as always, please like, comment, and subscribe.